Welcome to the Binge Eating to Food Freedom podcast for driven hearts and minds. If you pour your best self into everything you do, and yet food takes up so much energy that it pulls you away from what matters most, you're in the right place. I'm Katie Papo, and I'm here to help you create a healthy relationship with food that supports you to live your highest and best life. And for an extra edge, become a food freedom insider. Each week, I'll give you free, practical wisdom you can actually use in your daily life and more. Just head to katiepapo.com/resources or check the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode. I am so excited for today because I interviewed Amy, who overcame 43 years of binge eating, and she had tried everything from dieting to sugar addiction recovery programs to therapy to outpatient recovery for 12 weeks. She really did not give up in trying to solve this issue until she found the solution for her. And in today's episode, she shared so much of her wisdom, some really amazing nuggets in this episode that you'll absolutely be able to apply to your journey as well. So thank you so much, Amy, for coming on. And without further ado, let's dive in and hear Amy's wisdom. So, Amy, could you share your story about your relationship with food before we started working together?
Sure. Well, I would say I would sum it up as being rigidly controlled some of the time and totally out of control the rest of the time. And I would say my energy was going into either trying to control what I ate or didn't eat or trying to counteract the effects of binge eating. And I was definitely a compulsive exerciser for many years. And that kept my weight down despite the binges, which it it kept me looking a certain way on the outside, but it didn't help with the inside. The shame was still there, the feeling that I had this secret that nobody knew about, and if they knew about it, what would they think of me? I had so much together outside of my life, I was a high achiever in many areas, but I just could not figure this out, and so there was a lot of shame with it. And my relationship with the food just kept me from really being present in my life and enjoying the normal experiences of life because I was always so focused on what I did or didn't want to eat, or would I eat too much of this? Would I not? That kind of thing.
How long were you struggling with that? And what were you struggling the most with? What were the hardest parts of it?
I had started really sneaking food and binge eating around the age of 12, I think, 11 or 12. And I started working with you in 2020. So let's see, when I started working with you, that meant I had been struggling with it for 43 years, which is a long time. And yet something in my own self, I thought, I just kept trying to figure it out. I just kept thinking there had to be some solution. But of course, I was also feeling rather desperate too. So I give myself credit for continuing to look for solutions. And what did I struggle with the most? I guess I would say when I started working with you, what I was struggling with the most was the fact that I had had a back injury and could not do high impact, high intensity exercise anymore. And that kind of brought me to a crossroads because then I was still binging, but I couldn't counteract the effects of it with exercise, even though that wasn't really working anyway. It was sort of, seeming to work in my mind. And so I was really at a crossroads. I was gaining weight quickly. I didn't feel comfortable. I felt totally out of control. And it was just like a snowball effect. And I also had a lot of stresses in my life at that time. My parents were aging and my father was having health issues. I moved a number of times. So it just all kind of was heaped on. I didn't cope with stress well. And that's kinda how I came into your program, that the stress, my response to that was to binge eat.
It's interesting you said that. I actually didn't know that the injury happened around that time. And I had the same, very similar to you. I had a leg injury
Mhm.
and I had been compensating just like you described. And I said, well, as long as I can exercise at least. But then once the leg wasn't working, I got serious about what's a real solution to this? Not just a compensation, but can I actually get rid of this somehow, like fully?
Right. Yeah, it was my back injury was in 2018, so it was just a couple of years before I started working with you, and like I said, my since I couldn't exercise to compensate, my weight had gone up and I was getting closer to the diabetes markers, and so it was yeah, it was kind of a whole thing of, "I've got to do something about this. It's gonna be really impacting my health as I get older." And, not to mention just the mental um, cost on you. The fact that it's just taking so much energy and there's so much shame and secretiveness about it and all that.
You had mentioned that you had tried a number of things before then that you give yourself credit for continuing to try, which I too think is amazing and you should give yourself credit for not giving up on that. What were some of the things that you tried?
I tried all kinds of diets, not just to lose weight, but I would anything that said, "Oh, this will curb your food cravings," I would try it. I also tried things like eliminating all sugar, eliminating all white flour products, going high protein, going low carb. I saw 2 individual therapists specifically for the binge eating. Um, I did not that didn't resolve my problem, but they helped me with other things, and so I don't regret that. And I also had actually participated in an intensive 12-week outpatient program for binge eating. And I learned some things there, but it just didn't none of it was really sticking. None of it was really resolving any of this.
I remember when you first reached out to me, I think you had just done bright line eating, that program.
Wasn't bright line eating, but it was similar. It was, I'm familiar with that. It was the Sugar Addicts Recovery Program, or there's different names for it, Radiant Recovery, that kind of thing. And it's basically, getting to the point where you eliminate sugars and white flours and that kind of.
Why, in hindsight, now that you know what you know, looking back on all those things you tried, what would you say are the major reasons those things were not working for you?
I would say the major reason is because there was always some element of restriction still built into them. And there were always some rules, or at least well, I'm hesitating because one of the programs they wanted you to go very slowly so that you weren't like putting in all these rules all at one time. But I did not have the ability to really do that at that point because I was just desperate. So there were rules around food, what's okay, what's not okay, what to eat, what to avoid. And even if I had followed that one the way they exactly said, I feel like there would still be a lot of focus on the foods I was eating. And, going to holidays or going to someone's house, would I be able to eat this or not that, or that kind of thing. It just kept the focus on the foods. And that's not where that's not conducive to resolving the problem.
Exactly. Exactly. So what made you decide to work with me or see this as a potentially different path for you?
Well, found you on Facebook, which is I'm kind of amazed that I even followed through because I don't usually, I might look at something on Facebook that I see there, but I don't usually put a whole lot of stock in those and things. And I feel like, I often feel like, okay, they're just trying to sell me something. Um, but it caught my attention. I think there you had a little video or something talking about yourself and your struggles with it and how you had been through and resolved it. And that kind of caught my attention because I thought, well, here's somebody who has lived it, who knows what this is about and says that she's overcome it. And, I think you had a questionnaire we could fill out with your website and then could set up a free phone call. And I thought, well, there's no harm in that. Might as well talk to her. Doesn't cost me anything. And I would say when I was talking with you, and I think we were on the phone for a good half hour, that's kind of what clinched it for me. I just felt like you were very authentic. I believed your story. I believed your sincerity. Uh, and you seemed to know what you were talking about. And the fact that you pretty much guaranteed, if you didn't say money back guarantee if you overcome this, but you told me if you come to this with an open mind and put in the work and you stress that the work was not going to be incredibly time intensive, I would need to be consistent and open minded, but you said, I know this will work for you. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty strong statement. So at that point, I thought, well, I'm just going to take a leap of faith. And I did it with the idea that I would trust the process.
And you did. You really came in. I know that did you have fear when you did that?
I did. I had fear. I had probably the usual fear that some people have of, okay, is this just one more thing that I'm going to spend money on and it's not going to work, or it's going to work for a little while. And then once it's over, I'm going to go right back to the same habits. But I also had I thought it was kind of an odd fear. It makes sense to me now, but kind of an odd fear of having to let go of this comfort that I got from binge eating. And it's crazy because it's a very temporary comfort, but that's obviously, one of the reasons I was doing it. You don't keep doing something if you're not getting something out of it. And what I was getting was a very temporary but very powerful comfort. And part of me was afraid to let that go because I couldn't imagine what it would feel like to be okay without having that outlet.
I totally know that feeling. I hear from some other people who have joined the program since you that even though they know they're gonna come into it and not have to restrict or follow any kind of food rules or dieting, they'll still binge before they start because
Oh,
they
yeah.
the fear of the loss of the comfort that you're gonna lose that the way of coping,
Right.
which is a very scary thing.
It is, especially when you have no other frame of reference of what you can put there, to what it feels like to not have that. Or
So
you
let me
do know what it feels like to not have that for a short time, and it's not comfortable.
exactly. It's not comfortable. It's the total opposite of comfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell me, just regarding that point, what has changed in terms of how you cope with stress and uncomfortable things now that that's no longer your go-to thing?
Well, the biggest thing is I am so much more aware when I am actually feeling that stress instead of just having kind of a knee jerk reaction of, run to the fridge or grab some whatever. I'm more aware of it. I've learned to kind of feel where it's settling in my body. And a lot of times I'm alerted to some of that by tension, like tension in my shoulders and my neck. I've learned a lot about the power of just breathing and breathing and sitting still and being calm. And that just sounds so simple, but it is so powerful. And it's one of the very first things you have us do with the program. And I can see why. Yeah. So, and the other part, let's see, dealing with stress. So, yeah, I guess I would say that now, instead of turning to food, I turn inward more. I check in with myself. I'm not afraid of the feelings. I guess I feel empowered that once I figure out why I'm feeling stress and, where it's coming from, there will be something I can do to maybe not get rid of it all because that's not always the point. You can't get rid of all the stress in your life, but to take a step in a direction that is healthier for me, that can either lessen the stress or remove the stress from myself from the situation, that kind of thing. It's just a whole lot healthier.
Right. So for anyone who's listening who has the same fear as you of, well, what will I do to cope? It's not like now you're saying, "Oh, woe is me. I wish I could be binge eating," but
Right, right. And in fact, there's yeah, exactly. There's so many other ways to cope that are so much easier once you learn them. I mean, and that's one of the things about your program was I was surprised how naturally and easily it comes when you get a little bit into it and learn some of the exercises and practices to do. Yeah. It's not like I have to struggle and, pull out a sheet of paper and look, okay, what do I do now? You know, in the beginning, I might have had to look at some instructions and say, okay, this is what Katie recommends. But then it becomes very natural. And I just find myself going back to it without really thinking about it. And
right.
I will add, because I think this is important, and I'm not sure if we'll get it in anywhere else in the podcast, but I think it's important to let people know that I do consider myself to be, I do consider myself having overcome binge eating. I do not identify as a binge eater anymore. Having said that, there are times where I might eat, I definitely might overeat. And there have been times where I even would say I ate with the kind of the mindset of a binge. But the difference is that I was so aware. I was actually I don't know if people will understand this, but I was actually present when I was doing that. And I was able to, because I was aware and I recognized it for what it was, I was able to pretty much just stop at the overeating mark, not have it go into a binge really. And not have the shame come up, not have the desperate desire to, compensate for any food eaten. It's just, okay, this happened. Now let's go on with life or, look at, why did that happen? Oh, I see where the restriction came in and that kind of thing.
I agree. I think that's a very important distinction that you brought up. And I think that that's very common amongst normal eaters.
Yes.
All kinds of people, regardless of whether they've had a disordered eating history or not, will eat past fullness sometimes
Right.
or overeat a little bit past fullness or have something purely for the fact because it tastes good or because it might bring them some comfort in that moment. But it's
Right.
not this consuming pattern that's driving everything. And I
Right.
actually think it's a good thing. Not that in itself is necessarily a quote unquote good thing, but the good thing is normal eaters, when they have that experience, it's not a spiral. It's not
Right.
that they've then fallen off of the wagon. Whereas
Right.
when we're a binge eater, even if we eat perfectly for 45 days in a row, no binges, no eating outside the plan, if we have that period of I overate for this meal or I ate past fullness, or I had this food just for comfort, that would be the start of a downfall spiral.
Absolutely. And that's because that fear, when you're binge eating, that fear is always there. That fear of what if I lose control? What if I lose control? And now I don't have that fear.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So, you had mentioned also when you had first started, you found that things were kind of flowing naturally. And even though, yes, in the beginning, of course, I give a structure. I don't just say, figure it out,
Right.
listen to your body, even though you have no idea how to do that. Um, You followed the structure, but then things started to naturally show themselves. So, do you remember any specific examples of some of those first changes that you saw where you were like, okay, this is different than what I've done before? What did that look like in the beginning stages?
Yeah. Well, one thing I can think of really, I mean, it still has to do a little bit with the structure because one of the exercises we were doing in one of the early weeks was a food experiment where we would choose a so-called trigger food, something we had considered a trigger food, and sit and really be present and taste it, eat it, take our time, focus on it. And first of all, that was a little scary because I chose a box of chocolates, which was always just a huge trigger food. And I remember eating, I don't even know if it was the first, it may have even been the first piece. The first bite was good. And then like the second bite or the second piece of candy, I thought, I was really aware. I thought, that's kind of a nasty aftertaste. It tastes kind of artificial. And in the past, I never would have tasted chocolates like that. I would have just eaten them so fast and felt the sugar rush and had the taste bud blast right away, but not really tasted the nuances. And I think that was kind of a beginning of seeing that, oh, this is what food for pleasure is like. And I can have this and not want more of it necessarily. Or if it had been really good chocolates, maybe I would want more, but I didn't, it was so focused on the quality and on how it tasted and whether I was enjoying it that it was not something I wanted to binge on. And I put them away, which is unheard of. Since then, it's hard for me to think of real specifics, but I know that there's been many, many times where I've had things in the house that I would have said before, I can't have that in the house. And they've been in the house, and it's just like any normal eater. If I want some, I'll go get it. Sometimes I forget they're there, which never would happen in the past. Yeah, that's kind of the experience now.
Wow, that's amazing. I
It
had
really is.
it really is amazing. I
Yeah.
remember one of the first experiences when I was going through this process myself is I was at a friend's house, same as you with chocolates. Chocolate was a huge thing for me, and all kinds of sugary stuff was a huge thing.
Hmm.
But one of my habits was if I was with friends and we had like a bunch of food out or something, I wouldn't feel comfortable because of the image that I have of myself of, oh, I'm a healthy person. I wouldn't,
Right.
even though it was out and it was totally socially acceptable, I still wouldn't eat it. But then if they left the room to like go to the
Yes.
bathroom or something, I would just shovel a bunch in my mouth.
Yeah, yeah, I can
And
relate.
and
Yeah.
I remember I did that one time. It was, like, early in my kind of recovery process, and I shoveled a bunch of food in my mouth, just totally autopilot. Like, it was like
Mm,
my body just did it, my brain didn't even participate, my body just did it.
mm.
And I had the chocolate in my mouth, and I had exactly what you had. I tasted it, and I said, "This is not what I even want on my taste buds right now,"
Uh-huh.
and I spit it out, and it was the same thing. I said, "Who is this person?"
Yeah,
Never would have happened in a million years.
right, right,
And it's amazing when those first changes happen because it shows it's not that we're not eating it because we're using willpower,
right,
but because of genuine, no longer desiring it.
right. Yeah. Another thing that comes to mind, I don't know if it's the exact description of or answer to this question, but I used to live in a community where it was a small community of condos and there was a clubhouse and we would have potluck dinners once a month. And I would often go to the potluck dinner. And something you said made me think of this. It was like not wanting to eat certain things in front of people or a certain amount of certain things. I would have my plate of food and I might have a little dessert here and there. And then I would go home. And even though I'd had plenty to eat, I would just stuff myself with whatever I had at home. And I think it was this feeling of, well, it was a combination of things. It was having been at a social event, which I really enjoyed, but I am an introvert at heart. And so that takes energy from me. And one of the things somewhere in your program, I remember kind of learning how sometimes we use food or we have used food to sort of ground ourselves. And I was definitely doing that. It was like, okay, I had this energy that was kind of up in the air and I would just kind of unconsciously, yeah, try to bring myself down, back down, ground myself by eating. And so being aware of that helped me to make changes there. And then I also, as I moved through the program, I felt more comfortable going to the potluck dinner and having whatever I wanted. And if I wanted 3 pieces of dessert, I didn't care what people thought, and usually I didn't because they weren't that good, but it was just it wasn't a, it was my choice. That's the thing. It wasn't a feeling of, oh, I don't want to do that because of how it's going to look or this and that, and I was able to then go home and have enjoyed the outing, but find another way to ground myself, take a bath, stretch, call a friend, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've had the same thing.
Mhm.
The using food to ground.
Mhm.
If you think about it, food, it is grounding. It does,
Yeah.
right? Food is quite literally the earth. So when we
Yes.
bring more of the earth in us, we feel heavier, we feel more grounded. For someone who's dealing with anxiety, which is a very kind of heady, spirally up in the air kind of energy, it's very chaotic and erratic. The grounding, of course, we're going to naturally crave that. It's the opposite energy that we
Mhm.
want. And now I find, same as you, since I am an introvert at heart as well, and I need to recover sometimes from
Right.
my
Right.
social situations, the food is not the go to.
Right.
There's other ways that might actually do the job even better than that.
Right. And having said that, it's okay to use food to ground, but you need to be present and enjoy it for that purpose. And I wasn't after the potlucks. I was just shoveling it in, like you said.
Exactly.
If I
Exactly.
had come home and enjoyed something that I took my time to eat and really enjoyed, that would have been different, whole different experience.
That's a great point because, yes, sometimes, and especially if we're hungry, food is such a grounding thing. And the difference is when we binge or we're chaotic or feeling out of control about it, that is the opposite of a grounding energy. That's still
Right.
the erratic, that's still the chaotic, that's still swirling and spiraling and up in the air.
Yes.
So even though, yes, we're eating food, we're doing it in a completely ungrounded way.
Right. Right.
So
It's like an out of body experience. And yet all of this is going into your body,
exactly, exactly. I say
Yeah.
that a lot that our bodies are the one doing the eating, yet we're
Right.
completely
But we're not
disconnected.
connected. Yeah.
So you had mentioned earlier that when you first started the program and you were following the structure that you learned different ways to breathe and apply those to different eating situations and to slow down and to relax. I'm curious if, as you look back and you went through this process, and even over the last 5 years, as you've carried this with you and naturally integrated into your life and into your being, what are some of the core lessons that you've learned? Some things that
Um,
stick out.
I would say I was thinking about this earlier because that's a big question. I think one of the core lessons that I can really apply and have applied in my entire life is to keep an open mind. That is what I know. I know that doesn't necessarily have specifically to do with the food, but it's how I came into this program. I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to invest this much money and this much time and this much effort and be afraid and do it anyway. I am going to do it with an open mind. And by that, I mean, I'm going to set aside my feelings of, like many people, I felt like, oh, I can't just allow myself to eat anything and everything and whatever I want. That's never been my experience. That's not going to work. I set that aside. And that was a very powerful lesson because I look at this and I think, by having an open mind and moving forward along that path and what it brought me, if I was able to overcome 40 plus years of binge eating, my gosh, I can do anything, What else can I do? And so I've really, really tried to apply that in my life when I come up against something that I feel like is an obstacle, especially if I'm very much in my head, I'm like my own worst enemy a lot of times, my thoughts, that kind of thing. So in that area of my life, if I can just keep an open mind and kind of look at my rules that I've imposed on myself or the rules and restrictions on my thoughts and open that up, that has a huge impact. Does
That's
that answer the question?
yeah, well, it's your answer.
Well,
But
that's true.
but I think that's true that it's easy, especially when we have struggled with something for years.
Mhm.
I mean, and it's not just years, it's multiple decades. It's easy to become skeptical to the point of not being open. Because it's one
Right.
thing to be skeptical, but true skeptic
Right.
will be open because they're like, well, maybe yes and maybe no.
Right.
And for people to just dismiss things off the bat, I'm not saying, be open to every ridiculous thing that we come
Oh,
across,
no, me either. No. You gotta
but
have healthy skepticism, like you said. Yeah.
exactly. It's using wise discrimination,
Yes.
but being open. And I think that's huge because it's one thing to join a program, but then it's another thing to do the program
Mhm.
and to be willing to be uncomfortable for the sake of change.
Right. And as for other core aspects of the program that I've carried through with my life, I would say definitely, um, it comes naturally to me now that if I'm feeling stress or feeling anger or any uncomfortable feeling, I do now very quickly kind of check in with my body. I'll breathe, sit, go out into nature, which is that helps me kind of recalibrate. Um, just kind of go check in with myself. And I didn't used to do that. I just used to just react. Or really what I used to do was kind of as I went through my day, I would ignore all those feelings and then it would pile up and I always binged at night. Well, no wonder, I'd get home and it's like I stuffed all these feelings down and, everything had to get dealt with. And so now I'm much more likely to just deal with things as they come up, or it's just an awareness, I guess, much more aware.
Yeah. I think so many of us do that, especially people who do identify as more like the high achieving type.
Mhm.
We tend to just power through because
Right.
right what we tell ourselves about not having willpower around food, we can will ourselves to go through any difficult thing
Right.
without stopping for taking care of ourselves or checking in. Like we just go and go and go until we collapse. And that's when rejuvenation is not possible because it's not rest, it's collapse.
Right.
And sometimes the collapse is a binge or it's just, days of numbing and zoning out and whatever ways we do it, we beat ourselves for doing it because it's not in alignment with that high achiever identity. But in
Mm.
reality, that's our body's way of trying to balance out the overdoing in any way it can.
Right. Right. Yep. Yeah. And another thing too, I don't know if this really speaks to that question, but I just thought of it too. A huge change since doing the program for me is I totally dropped what they call the diet mentality. I don't have any interest in looking at whatever the new diet is or whatever so and so says is going to do this. And, there's just no interest. I don't feel one way or another about it. It's just not for me. I don't own a scale. I do get weighed when I go to the doctor's office if I feel like, if they ask me to get on the scale and I don't want to, I'll just say, well, I'd rather not do that. But I have no problem doing it. So I'll get on the scale there, but it means nothing to me. It's like, it's just information. It's not a reflection on me, or it doesn't require action of me to do anything. And where else was I going with that? I was going to say something about that topic. Oh, the diet mentality. Yeah. It's just, that's true freedom to be away from that. and also to not care what other people think about me. And I will say, it used to worry me that, oh, if I got over the binge eating and didn't have it, or I couldn't imagine life without trying to control my weight. Let's put it that way. And what I might look like. Well, that's ridiculous because I look just fine. But I also feel like I do want to get more fit and I want to feel different as I go into I'm turning 60 this year as I go into this part of my life. And I feel like I can do it now in a healthy way, in a way that's not going to make me crazy, but I don't have to abandon those goals, you know. Now, I
Exactly.
wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that right away. I had to kind of heal that whole binge eating. But I will say too, and I hope this is okay to say, I lost 30 pounds while I was doing the year I was doing your program, and I didn't try, and I've kept it off without trying, without giving it any thought. I've kept that off for 5 years. So if anybody's afraid of long-term weight loss, I mean, weight gain, that's a
No
slippery.
one's afraid of longer weight.
If anybody's afraid of gaining weight and not being able to get rid of it when they resolve the binge eating, I would say just don't even get that out of your head right now. You might gain a little weight, you might not. It's just all individual, but it all evens out and you're going to have freedom. You're going to have peace of mind. You're going to settle into what's right for your body. And then if you want to make changes, you'll be able to do it from a healthy place.
Exactly. I think that's great that you said that because there's a there despite common belief, there is a way to become very healthy and fit without being obsessed.
Yes.
And we look at people there we see examples of people like this around us. We see examples of it all. We see people who, yes, might be very fit, but it is their whole life and they can't take a vacation and they can't have any deviations from their routine or it's going to stress them out and just knock them off their routine. There are other people who just seem to be consistent and it doesn't seem to monopolize any amount of their time, but they just do their routine and they enjoy it and then they move on and they have a balanced life in many ways. And I think you're right that in order to get to that place, the resolving of the binge eating has to come first because the way that we do that is by healing the relationship with how we relate to
Right.
ourselves.
Right.
So if we're relating to ourselves by constantly trying to control and berate and criticize and obsess, whatever routine we pick, even if we're doing yoga or something that in
Mhm.
theory is very wellness oriented, we're going to be doing it with a sick mindset.
Right.
And so again can relate to exactly what you're saying because for me also having gone through the using exercise to compensate for the binge eating and the fear of gaining weight and using that to compensate, it's a completely different experience now in terms
Mhm.
of movement and exercise and
Mhm.
it's so much more. Oh, like, even thinking it, I'm just, like, breathing. I'm just
Yeah.
breathing.
Yeah.
It's not pressure, it's
Right.
fun, and, of course, there's still challenge,
Right.
but it's not the challenge that I'm fearing, and I'm stressed about, and I'm dreading, and I'm gearing myself up for, and I have to be hyper motivated for all the time. It's
Right.
it's a totally different thing.
Right. And I feel like you can when you're approaching it from a healthy with a healthy mindset and a healthy relationship to food in your body, it becomes part of your life. It's not something like, in the past I would do a diet or an exercise plan. It's like, okay, for 3 months I'm gonna be hardcore, and that takes you out of your life. It takes you even if you achieved what your goals were at that time, and now I would argue you're not gonna be able to keep them, but or keep it, but it takes you out of your life. And I don't want to live my life from the outside looking in. I want to be experiencing and, just being present.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Is there anything else, Amy, that you felt you wanted to share today that we haven't covered yet?
No, I just would like to, if there's anybody listening that is really thinking about this, I would just like to encourage them to take a chance. There is a solution. You can live a life where your energy goes towards things you love rather than toward trying to control what you do or don't eat. You do have to go into it with an open mind and be willing to let go of certain beliefs that might seem hard to get rid of at first to let go of. But if you trust in the process, I think you'll be successful. And I guess the only other thing I'd like to say is just there is no one else exactly like each of us individually on this earth. So if you're out there and you're thinking of doing this, you deserve to live your best life, and the world needs your unique gifts. So give yourself the gift of freedom from whatever holds you back. Thank you, Katie. I cannot thank you enough. You have changed the trajectory of my life.
Oh, thank you, Amy. I'm so grateful to have worked with you, and I'm so grateful for anyone who's listening. Amy has come multiple times now, just so generously, and to share your story, which not everybody does that, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
But it's so meaningful to me that you do come on and to show yourself as an example of what's possible. And every time I see you, you are and I don't mean this in a weight way. I mean this in an energetic way. You are a lighter version of yourself.
Oh, thank you. I feel like I am every time. It's just getting lighter and lighter.
Lighter, lighter. Thank you, Amy, for coming on. And for anybody who's listening and would like to learn more about this process and the program that Amy has gone through and many others have gone through as well, you can go to my website, katiepapo.com/programs. And you can reach out to me with any of your questions or fears or anything that you'd like to discuss before taking that leap, as Amy put it. And I would love to be a support for you in any way I can. So thank you again for Amy for coming on, and I'm very grateful for you. And we'll see you next week.